Imagine saving every dollar, every ounce of energy just to buy your dream home. A house with a garden, a place for peace, a chance to finally breathe. But the moment you held the keys, your husband walked in with his mother and sister, ready to claim it as their own. And when you said no, they handed you divorce papers already signed. This is the story of how one woman's dream turned into a nightmare until she turned the nightmare back on them.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is about Abigail, a woman who thought she had finally found stability after years of struggle, but instead she was betrayed by the very people who were supposed to be her family. From a manipulative mother-in-law to a cheating husband, Abigail's story takes us through heartbreak, cruelty, and finally, revenge. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or pushed to the edge, this story will hit home. So make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with us till the end, because the twist in this tale will leave you stunned. I always believed that one day, after years of scraping by, I'd finally find a place where I could plant roots, somewhere far from the chaos of the city, where the nights were quiet, the mornings smelled like fresh dew, and the sky stretched wide enough to hold every forgotten dream. When I found the little white house with its weathered porch in upstate New York, I thought my search was over. Closing day was supposed to be the beginning of everything. I remember clutching the keys in my hand, my palms sweaty from excitement. The papers were signed, the deal done, and I had the title in my name. I could almost smell the wildflowers I'd grow in the back garden, hear the soft creak of a porch swing as I sipped coffee, and let the wind brush against my face. I had worked too long and too hard to get here. Long nights at the ad agency, writing slogans for toothpaste and insurance ads that nobody remembered, all to put away a few extra dollars each month. But now, here I was, the proud owner of a house. I thought I'd walk into that home with Caleb, my husband, and we'd look at each other and say, "This is it. This is ours." I thought maybe, just maybe, this would finally be the chapter of peace I'd been craving. But the fantasy lasted less than 24 hours. That night, back in our cramped apartment in Rochester, Caleb walked through the door, his mother right behind him. Both wore smiles so wide they made my stomach twist. It wasn't the kind of smile you wear when you're happy for someone. No, theirs were the smiles of people who had already won a game I didn't know we were playing. "Good news, Abigail," Caleb said, his voice just a little too bright, too rehearsed. "Mom and my sister are moving into the new house with us." The words hit me like a slap. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I just stared, the keys to my house still warm in my hand. Before I could answer, his mother stepped forward, her eyes gleaming like polished glass. "And if you don't like it, Caleb's ready to divorce you. Right, honey?" she said sweetly, patting his arm. Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me. My chest tightened. Divorce? Over this? I'd poured every dime I had into that house. I had fought for it, sacrificed for it, dreamed of it. And now, before I'd even moved in, his mother was dangling my marriage like it was a leash, ready to yank it away if I didn't comply. I shook my head slowly, my voice trembling, but firm. "No, I'm not living with you." For the first time that night, the smug smile on her face cracked. Her eyebrows arched high, and then her mouth twisted into a cruel smirk. With the calm of someone who had already prepared for this moment, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. Divorce papers. Caleb's signature scrawled neatly across the line. "Sign here, then," she said coldly. "If you're so stubborn, you don't deserve this family or the house." The air in the room felt heavy, pressing down on me. Caleb's silence roared louder than any shouting could. He didn't stop her. He didn't even defend me. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the floor, as if I weren't even worth the fight. I looked at the papers, then at his mother's victorious expression. She thought she'd cornered me, thought she'd won. For a moment, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from the fury bubbling inside me. And then something in me shifted. Without another word, I picked up the pen, scrawled my name across the line,
and pushed the papers back to her. Caleb's head jerked up, his eyes wide with surprise, but still he said nothing. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed a bag, stuffed it with the essentials, and headed for the door. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't even look back. But as I stepped into the cool evening air, the strangest thing happened. A smile tugged at the corner of my lips. I bit it back, keeping my face neutral so they wouldn't see, because the truth was they hadn't won, not even close. They thought they had cornered me, broken me, pushed me out of the life I'd built, but they had no idea what I was capable of. They didn't know the plans I was already forming, the trap I was ready to set. As the door clicked shut behind me, I whispered under my breath, words only meant for me, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I would make them regret ever underestimating me. If I had learned anything in the short years of my marriage, it was this. Caleb's mother didn't make requests. She made ultimatums. And Caleb, he obeyed them like commandments carved in stone. When she laid those divorce papers on the table, it wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration. She didn't want to share the house. She wanted to own me, to bend me until I broke, until my life, my dreams, even my dignity revolved around her whims. And Caleb, he was the perfect soldier for her war. I used to think love meant sacrifice, that maybe living with his mother in their sagging rental was just a test of patience, a way to show him I was committed. I told myself she was frail, recovering from illness, and that he just needed time before we could move out. But the truth became clear long before the house incident. She wasn't frail, and Caleb wasn't buying time. She was in control, and he liked it that way. The first time I saw the mask slip was just weeks after our wedding. We moved into her rental house, an old, leaning structure that groaned whenever the wind blew. The wallpaper peeled like sunburnt skin, the floors squeaked with every step, and the draft slipped through the windows like a thief. Still, I tried to make the best of it. I scrubbed the kitchen until the counters shone, replaced broken knobs on the cabinets, and bought little plants to brighten the windowsills.
But she noticed none of it. Instead, she pointed at a single smudge I'd missed on a glass and sneered, "Abigail, the dishes aren't clean enough. What kind of wife can't even wash properly?" At first, I laughed it off. She was just being difficult, I thought. But it wasn't just once. The very next day, she stood by the garden, her cane tapping against the dirt as if it were a conductor's baton. "These weeds are a disgrace. Pull them all out. Today. Don't you care about appearances?" I had worked 10 hours at the agency that day, my mind spinning with ad copy deadlines and client calls, but still I knelt in the dirt, my fingers aching, pulling weeds until my hands stung. She didn't thank me. She didn't even look. By dinner, she was back to barking orders about the laundry. It became a cycle. Every day she demanded more. Every day I bent a little further. And Caleb, he'd sit there scrolling through his phone or sipping a beer, shrugging whenever I begged him to intervene. "Mom's got a temper," he'd say. Like that excused everything. Like cruelty was just part of her charm. But her ultimatums weren't just about chores. They were about control. She'd loom in the doorway when Caleb and I argued, her sharp eyes darting between us, waiting to pounce. "You'll never find anyone better than my son," she'd hiss when I raised my voice. "You'd better remember who feeds you, Abigail. Without him, you're nothing." And Caleb would let her speak for him, as though he'd handed her the script of our marriage. The day she first threatened divorce was long before the papers actually appeared. I remember it vividly. I'd come home late, traffic dragging my commute into hours. When I stepped through the door, exhausted and hungry, she was waiting.
"You didn't pick up my medication," she snapped. "I could have had a spell because of you." I apologized, my throat tight with guilt, even though she had never once asked me to stop at the pharmacy. But she didn't want my apology. She wanted my submission. "Maybe Caleb should reconsider this marriage," she said, her eyes narrowing. "If you can't handle simple responsibilities, Maybe you're not cut out to be a wife. I looked at Caleb, desperate for him to push back, to defend me, but he just nodded weakly, avoiding my eyes. And in that silence, I realized she wasn't just threatening me. She was conditioning him to see me as disposable. By the time the house entered the picture, her plan was complete. The divorce papers she carried weren't a bluff. They were the final act of a play she'd been scripting since the day I moved in. And yet, as much as her cruelty stung, it awakened something in me. At night, I'd lie awake in our cramped bedroom, Caleb's back turned to me as he snored softly. My heart would pound, my chest tight with unspoken anger. The words ran through my head like a mantra. This isn't love. This isn't family. This isn't forever. But I kept quiet, waiting, because I knew one day an opportunity would come. That day came with the house. Her ultimatum, "Let us move in or Caleb divorces you," wasn't the end of my story. It was the spark, the final push I needed to stop bending, stop begging, and start fighting. When I signed those papers, they thought they'd cornered me, that I was walking away in defeat. But in truth, I was stepping into a new role. No longer the obedient daughter-in-law, no longer the silent wife. I was Abigail, and I was about to become their worst mistake. The rental house was never meant to be permanent. At least that's what Caleb told me. Just until Mom feels better, he'd said, wrapping his arm around me the day we moved in. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But weeks turned into months, and months felt like years. And that house became less of a shelter and more of a prison. It was the kind of place that seemed to breathe misery into its walls. The floors creaked like old bones with every step. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, exposing faded plaster beneath. In the winter, the wind slid through the cracks in the windows, rattling the panes like ghostly fingers. It smelled faintly of mildew and mothballs, a scent that clung no matter how hard I scrubbed. I tried to make it livable. I lit candles, set flowers in chipped vases, even bought a secondhand rug to cover the worst of the stains. But nothing could cover the real problem, the people inside it. From the very first morning, my mother-in-law established her dominance. She sat at the wobbly kitchen table, cane propped beside her like a scepter, her sharp eyes scanning the room as though she were inspecting a servant. "Abigail, the counters are sticky. Wipe them again." I'd already wiped them twice. "And don't forget the baseboards," she added, her lips curling. I was already late for work, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. But none of that mattered to her. My career, my exhaustion, my own needs, irrelevant. That became my life. Endless commands. Endless criticism. "You missed a spot on the floor. The laundry isn't folded properly. You forgot to water the garden." It wasn't just the work. It was the way she said it. Every word dipped into stain, as though my very existence was an inconvenience. And Caleb, he never defended me. He'd shrug, laugh nervously, and say, "Mom's just particular," as though that explained everything. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake beside him, staring at the cracked ceiling, my chest tight with anxiety. Sometimes I'd slip into the bathroom just to cry, pressing a towel against my mouth so no one would hear. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The woman who had fought her way into a marketing job without a degree, the woman who had survived on grit and stubbornness, that woman was fading. One morning, I collapsed in the shower, shaking uncontrollably. My doctor later called it an adjustment disorder, a polite, clinical phrase for what I already knew. The constant stress, the verbal abuse, the isolation, it was breaking me. But breaking didn't mean defeated. Not yet. Every insult she hurled, every chore she forced on me, every time Caleb looked away instead of standing beside me, it all went into a box inside my chest. A box I kept sealed, storing anger, resentment, and pain like kindling waiting for a spark. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the storm arrived. Her daughter, my sister-in-law. She showed up one muggy afternoon, dragging a suitcase behind her and clutching her little boy's hand. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling as she announced through tears that her husband had thrown her out. For a brief moment, sympathy stirred in me. Divorce wasn't something I'd wish on anyone, especially not with a child involved. But pity turned to ash the moment she unpacked. She was her mother's twin in spirit, sharp-tongued, entitled manipulative. She sprawled across the couch with her phone, smirking as she handed me dirty dishes. "Parenting's harder than it looks," she'd say, shoving her son in my direction before vanishing to bars with her friends. Her son was sweet, innocent, but wild with neglect. He trailed me around the house, seeking the attention his mother never gave. I tried, I really did, to care for him, but I was stretched thin, drowning under the weight of everyone else's demands. And she knew it. She thrived on it. One evening, I walked into my room and found her rifling through my dresser drawers. My heart stopped as I saw my late father's watch in her hand. A simple, battered thing, but priceless to me. "What's this worth?" she asked casually, her tone mocking. "Might sell for a decent price." I snatched it from her, my voice shaking. "That's mine. Don't touch it." She just laughed and walked out, leaving the air heavy with the sound of her cruelty. Later, I noticed other things missing: earrings, makeup, scarves. She took them all, piece by piece, as though erasing me from my own life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pack my bags and run, but where would I go? The house was supposed to be temporary. Caleb had promised, and every time I begged him to move, he fed me the same lines. "Mom's not well. We can't afford it yet. Just give it time, Abigail." But time wasn't healing anything. It was killing me. The day I found out about Caleb's affair, it felt like the floor finally caved in. A friend called me, her voice hesitant. "Abigail, I saw Caleb downtown with a woman. They looked close, more than close. Her name was Haley, a bartender with a reputation for flashy smiles and fast nights." I confronted him, heart pounding, voice breaking. "Who is she, Caleb? Tell me the truth." He stammered, pale, sweating. "Just a friend, nothing serious." But I knew better. The proof came later. Photos of him and Haley slipping into a motel, laughing, hands intertwined like lovers. When I showed his mother, hoping for some sliver of support, she scoffed. "If you were a better wife, he wouldn't stray. A real woman knows her place." That was the moment I realized there was no saving this, no winning their approval, no fixing a marriage that had never truly been mine. But something else crystallized inside me that night. Something sharp, something strong. If they wanted to play dirty, then I'd play smarter. And I was done waiting.
If my mother-in-law was thunder, booming and relentless, then my sister-in-law was lightning, sudden, sharp, and just as destructive. The day she and her son moved in was the day the storm truly took hold of my life. Her arrival wasn't quiet. She barged through the door, her suitcase thudding against the floorboards, her little boy trailing behind like a forgotten shadow. Tears streaked her cheeks as she collapsed dramatically onto the couch. "My ex threw me out," she sobbed, her mascara smudging. "Said he's done with me. Can you believe it? After everything I gave him?" For a brief second, I felt sympathy. Divorce was painful, and she was clearly shaken. But as the hours unfolded, I realized her grief was nothing more than a performance. She wasn't broken. She was bitter. Her little boy tugged at her sleeve, asking for dinner, and she waved him off with an annoyed flick of her hand. "Ask Aunt Abigail. She'll feed you." And just like that, I became not only a wife and maid, but also a surrogate mother. The boy was sweet, innocent, his eyes wide and searching for affection. He clung to me as I cooked, as I cleaned, as I tried to balance my full-time job with the endless demands of the household. His laugh was a rare light in the suffocating gloom of that house, but he wasn't mine to raise, and every time I looked at him, I felt the weight of his mother's neglect pressing down on both of us. She, meanwhile, blossomed in her new role. Freeloading tyrant. The first week, she sprawled across the couch in her pajamas, scrolling her phone for hours, the sink filled with dishes, the laundry piled high, and when I asked for help, she smirked. "Parenting's harder than it looks, Abigail. You wouldn't understand. You don't have kids." Then she'd drop her son in my lap and vanish into the night, returning hours later reeking of alcohol and perfume. My mother-in-law cheered her on, proud of her daughter's strength. To them, I wasn't family.
I was staff, a convenient body to do the work they didn't want to touch. The theft started small, a tube of lipstick, a scarf, but then it escalated. One night, I walked into my bedroom to find her rifling through my dresser. My heart stopped as I saw her holding my father's watch, the one keepsake I had left from him. "What's this worth?" she asked casually, turning it over in her hands like it was trash. "Could probably get a few bucks for it." I snatched it from her, my voice shaking. "That's mine. Don't you dare touch it." She laughed, as though my pain was a punchline. Later, I noticed other things missing. Earrings my mother had given me, a shawl I'd bought with my first paycheck. She pawned them all, leaving me hollow with rage and helplessness. I tried to confront Caleb, desperate for him to stand beside me. "She's stealing from me, Caleb. She's leaving her kid with me every night while she parties. This isn't fair." But Caleb only sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's going through a tough time, Abigail. Try to be understanding." Understanding? My life was unraveling, my possessions vanishing, my sanity cracking, and he wanted me to understand? The breaking point came one weekend. I came home after a long shift at the agency, my shoulders aching, only to find the house in chaos. Toys littered the floor, the boy crying in the corner, and his mother nowhere in sight. My mother-in-law sat at the table, sipping tea like a queen. "Your sister-in-law went out with friends," she said casually. "You'll have to watch the boy tonight." I knelt beside him, wiping his tears, fury boiling inside me. I wasn't his mother. I hadn't chosen this. Yet here I was, sacrificing my peace, my freedom, my very self, for people who treated me like nothing. It was then, as I rocked the little boy to sleep, that I realized something. I wasn't fragile anymore. I was angry. And anger was a strange kind of power. That night, lying awake in bed, I began to plan. Not just vague daydreams of escape, but real, tangible steps. I started small, recording my mother-in-law's cruel tirades on my phone. "You're useless, Abigail. You'll never be good enough." Click, saved. I bought a small, hidden camera and placed it in my bedroom, capturing my sister-in-law rummaging through my belongings. Proof, evidence. And I tucked away the photos my friend had given me, Caleb and Haley laughing as they slipped into a motel. My hands shook as I looked at them, but I kept them close. Ammunition. Every insult, every theft, every betrayal became fuel. The house had become a battlefield, and I was done being the casualty. From that moment on, I smiled when they insulted me. I nodded when they barked orders. I played the obedient wife and daughter-in-law, hiding the storm building beneath my calm exterior. Because I knew something they didn't. They thought they were breaking me, but I was sharpening myself into a weapon. Trust isn't something that shatters in one moment. It cracks slowly, splinter by splinter, until one day you realize it's already broken. With Caleb, I should have seen it coming. For months, he had been slipping away from me, his excuses piling up like dirty laundry, working late, grabbing drinks with the guys, just blowing off steam. At first, I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to believe him. After all, wasn't that what marriage was? Giving the person you loved the benefit of the doubt? But doubt has a way of growing, and mine grew like weeds. The first real crack came when a friend from another agency called me one evening. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Abigail, I saw Caleb downtown. He wasn't alone. He was with some woman. Arm in arm. They looked close." The words hit me like a gut punch. My heart stuttered. My stomach clenched. "Are you sure?" I whispered, praying she'd say she'd made a mistake, but she didn't. And deep down, I already knew. Her name was Haley, a bartender from a dive bar downtown, known for her flashy style and flirty smile. The kind of woman who thrived on attention, who lived for the thrill of being wanted. And Caleb, weak and desperate for validation, had fallen right into her trap. When I confronted him that night, my voice shook with rage. "Who is she, Caleb? Tell me the truth." He froze, his face pale,
sweat beading on his forehead. "She's just a friend, nothing serious." A friend? My chest burned. Friends didn't hold hands in the street. Friends didn't sneak into motels together.
I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel even a fraction of the betrayal that was tearing me apart. But all I could do was stare, numb and broken, as he spun excuses that even he didn't believe. The next day, my friend handed me proof, photos. Caleb and Haley laughing together as they slipped into a cheap motel, his arm around her waist, his lips pressed against her hair. Proof that my husband wasn't just a coward, he was a liar. When I showed his mother, hoping, foolishly, for some sliver of support, she scoffed. If you were a better wife, he wouldn't stray. A real woman lets a man be a man. Her words burned like acid. To her, Caleb could do no wrong. His betrayal wasn't his fault. It was mine. Everything was always mine. That night, I lay in bed beside him, listening to his steady breathing. My mind raced, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I wasn't just angry at him, I was angry at myself for believing him, for sacrificing so much, for letting them make me feel small. But beneath the anger, something else stirred: resolve. If Caleb thought he could betray me and walk away unscathed, he was wrong. If his mother thought she could crush me into submission, she was wrong. If his sister thought she could steal from me and laugh in my face, she was wrong. They had underestimated me, and that was their biggest mistake. I began to plan. During the day, I played the role of the dutiful wife, nodding, smiling, pretending to believe his lies. But at night, when he drifted into sleep, I sat awake, scribbling notes, researching, scheming. That was when I first learned about the defective houses, properties built on land scarred by old coal mining tunnels, the ground beneath unstable, the foundations destined to sink. On the surface, they looked perfect, spacious, charming, affordable. But to anyone who knew the truth, they were poison. And poison was exactly what I needed. I met with a real estate agent named Tara, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes who had seen it all. She showed me listings, warning me which ones were traps. "Only newcomers buy these," she said, shaking her head. "Locals know better." I nodded, my face neutral, hiding the spark of an idea that flared inside me. I wasn't buying the house for myself. I was buying bait. I tucked one of the glossy listings into my bag, careful to leave it where I knew my sister-in-law's greedy hands would find it. And I waited. It didn't take long. One evening, as we sat at dinner, she spotted the papers sticking out of my purse. Her eyes gleamed as she pulled them free, spreading them across the table. "A house with a garden," she said, her voice dripping with fake excitement. "Why didn't you tell us about this, Abigail?" My mother-in-law leaned over, her eyes narrowing on the photos. "Spacious, cheap, this is perfect. Why keep it a secret?" I stammered, feigning innocence. "I was just looking. I didn't," but Caleb cut me off, puffing up like a man finally making a bold decision. "This is a big move, Abigail. I'm the head of the household. If we buy this house, it goes in my name. Understood?" I bit my tongue, forcing myself to nod, hiding the smile threatening to break across my face. Because they had no idea they'd just walked into my trap. Every betrayal, every insult, every stolen piece of me had led to this moment. And soon, they'd pay the price. There's a certain kind of silence that follows betrayal. It isn't empty. It hums, it buzzes, it thrums with everything you can't yet say out loud. That silence became my armor. On the surface, nothing changed. I still scrubbed floors until my knuckles ached. I still cooked meals only to hear complaints about how bland or overseasoned they were. I still smiled tightly when my sister-in-law left her boy with me so she could vanish into the night. And Caleb, he still rolled over in bed, his phone screen lighting up his face long after midnight, his lies tucked neatly beneath the covers. But beneath the silence, I was working. Every insult was fuel. Every stolen belonging, every betrayal, every night I cried alone in the bathroom, it all became bricks in the fortress I was building. The defective house listing was just the first stone. I knew my sister-in-law couldn't resist temptation. Greed ran in her blood. When she found the glossy flyer, she waved it like treasure, her eyes glittering. "Look at this! A wraparound porch, a garden. Abigail, why keep this to yourself?" My mother-in-law leaned in, her voice sharp with hunger. "This is what we need. No more rotting rental. This is a real home." And Caleb, predictably, puffed up his chest. "We'll take it. I'll handle everything. The mortgage will be in my name." I bowed my head, feigning defeat, while inside, satisfaction burned. Tara, my real estate agent, had warned me about that house. "It's beautiful on the outside, rotten on the inside. Only a fool would buy it." Perfect. I arranged everything carefully. My savings became the down payment. Every dime I'd bled for at the agency, every hour of overtime, every dream I'd deferred, it was worth it because this wasn't a purchase. It was an investment in freedom.
And to make sure I wasn't just running on anger, I began gathering evidence like ammunition. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I scrolled through the recordings on my phone. My mother-in-law's voice rang sharp and venomous. "You're useless, Abigail. You'll never be good enough. If you don't like it, leave. Caleb deserves better." Click. Saved. The hidden camera I'd tucked in my bedroom captured my sister-in-law rifling through my things, slipping jewelry into her pocket, her face twisted with greed. More evidence. And the photos of Caleb with Haley, I tucked those into a neat little envelope, along with a doctor's letter diagnosing me with adjustment disorder. Proof that their abuse wasn't just cruel, it was destructive. Piece by piece, I built my case, not for them, for me, for the day I'd finally unleash it all. But before I could move, I had to let the trap snap shut. They signed the papers with smug smiles, talking about where they'd put furniture, what they'd do with the garden, how perfect the house would be for their family. Not once did they say, "our family." Not once did Caleb look at me and acknowledge my sacrifice. To them, I was invisible, and that invisibility was my advantage. On the day of closing, I stood outside the house with them, its white fence gleaming in the sun, its windows catching the light like jewels. To anyone else, it looked like a dream. To me, it looked like a coffin. "This is it," Caleb said proudly, holding up the keys as if he'd earned them. "Our new beginning." His mother nodded, eyes shining. Finally, a home worthy of us. I stayed silent, biting back the laughter rising in my throat, because I knew what they didn't. The land beneath this dream was fractured, unstable, doomed to sink. The floors would warp, the doors would jam, the foundation itself would betray them, just as they had betrayed me. The moment they stepped inside, I felt a strange kind of peace settle over me. They thought they'd taken everything from me. In reality, I just delivered them into the jaws of their own greed. That night, they celebrated with takeout and wine, clinking glasses over their victory. I washed the dishes quietly, my face neutral, my heart racing. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was already crumbling, but I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. First, I needed one final act. A clean break that would leave no doubt about who truly held the power. I waited until the moment was right, until my mother-in-law was so comfortable she believed she'd won, until my sister-in-law strutted around like the queen of the house, until Caleb sank fully into his lies, thinking Haley's secret would stay hidden forever. Then, one evening, as the sun set and shadows stretched long across the walls of that defective house, I said the words that shifted everything. "No, I'm not living with you." The room fell silent. My mother-in-law's face darkened, rage blooming in her eyes. She reached into her bag and pulled out the divorce papers, Caleb's signature gleaming. "Then sign. You're nothing without us." I picked up the pen. My hands didn't tremble this time. I signed, slid the papers back across the table, and stood. And for the first time in years, I walked away without fear, because they thought the divorce was their victory. But it was my liberation. The trap had sprung, and soon they would feel it closing in around them. They called it a new beginning. I called it the beginning of their end.
The house looked perfect to them on the surface. Freshly painted siding, gleaming windows, a wraparound porch that begged for summer nights. To the untrained eye, it was the picture of stability. But I knew the truth. I knew what lay beneath. The land wasn't stable. The foundations weren't sound. Time itself would turn the dream into a nightmare. I left quietly, just as planned. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when I packed a bag, thanked the silence for its patience, and moved into a small apartment in Rochester. It wasn't much, a single bedroom, cheap carpet, and a view of the parking lot. But it was mine, my sanctuary. Meanwhile, the calls started almost immediately. First, it was Caleb, his voice nervous. "Abigail, you should come back. Mom says you're making a mistake. We can fix this." I hung up. Then it was his mother, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You're nothing without us. Do you hear me? Nothing." But then the tone shifted. A week after move-in, her voice cracked through my voicemail, shrill with panic. "Abigail, this house is a disaster. The floors are uneven, the doors won't close properly, the whole place is slanting. You knew, didn't you? You tricked us." I played the message on repeat, my lips curving into a smile I couldn't contain. They had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. The reports were exactly what Tara had warned me about. Floors beginning to slope, doors that swung shut on their own, cracks crawling across the walls like veins. My mother-in-law was furious. My sister-in-law wailed about how her garden parties would be ruined. And Caleb, he tried to stay calm, but the strain was evident. They had a mortgage now, a massive one, on a house that would never hold its value. A prison dressed up like a palace. And best of all, it was in Caleb's name. When I answered her next call, I played dumb. "Really? A defective house? That sounds awful. Are you sure it's not just settling?" She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Don't you dare play innocent, Abigail. You set us up. You'll pay for this." But we both knew the truth. She'd done it to herself. The town whispered quickly. Word spread about the new house that was already falling apart. Neighbors noticed the tilted porch, the windows that didn't align, and people talked. They always talked. Caleb's job at the newspaper became unbearable. Colleagues snickered behind his back, whispering about how his perfect wife had walked away while he played house with his mother. Mark, the manager who had introduced us, turned cold. His once easy smiles vanished, replaced by curt nods and clipped words. Caleb's charm wasn't enough to shield him anymore. And then the bills came. Repairs they couldn't afford, mortgage payments that swallowed half their income, my sister-in-law's bar tabs piling up, my mother-in-law demanding Caleb be a real man and fix everything, even as the house literally shifted under their feet. I didn't need to lift a finger. The house itself was doing the work for me. But I wasn't done, not yet. Because while the house drained their wallets, I still had something far more powerful. Evidence. Late one night, sitting in my apartment, I laid everything out on the table. The recordings of my mother-in-law's tirades, each one dripping with venom. The hidden camera footage of my sister-in-law pocketing my father's watch. The photos of Caleb with Haley, proof of his betrayal. The doctor's letter, documenting how their abuse had broken me down. I arranged them neatly, like weapons in an arsenal. It wasn't enough for them to suffer privately. No, they needed to be reminded that I wasn't weak, that the girl they mocked, belittled, and tried to erase had sharpened herself into something they couldn't fight. So when my mother-in-law demanded a meeting, furious, shrieking, threatening lawsuits, I agreed. But I chose the location, not their crumbling house, not a lawyer's office, but a bustling cafe in downtown Rochester. Neutral ground, public enough to keep things civil. I pictured it clearly, her face twisting when I slid the evidence across the table, my sister-in-law paling at the footage of her theft, Caleb sinking lower in his chair as the photos of Haley stared back at him. That moment would be mine. Until then, I let them stew. Every voicemail they left was more desperate than the last. My mother-in-law's voice cracked with rage. My sister-in-law whined about the unfairness of it all. Caleb begged, his pride in tatters, but I didn't answer. I watered my plants, cooked in peace, and slept soundly for the first time in years. Because while they sank, literally and figuratively, I was finally learning to breathe. And the best part? They thought they still had the upper hand, but soon they would learn the truth. The house was just the beginning.
The night I signed the divorce papers should have felt like failure. On paper, I had lost everything. My husband, my marriage, the house I had dreamed of. But as I slid the folder back across the table, Caleb's signature already gleaming beside mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. It wasn't grief that settled over me. It wasn't sorrow or regret. It was freedom. Strange and sweet, humming through my veins like electricity. I remember the silence in that moment. Caleb wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at the worn table as though the grain of the wood might save him. My mother-in-law's smirk was triumphant, her hand resting possessively on his arm. My sister-in-law lounged nearby, her painted nails tapping against her phone screen, already acting like she owned the place. To them, it was victory. To me, it was liberation. I stood, the pen still warm in my hand. "I'm done," I said simply, my voice steady. For the first time, Caleb looked up. There was something in his eyes, hesitation, maybe even fear. But it was too late. Whatever part of me that once loved him was gone, buried beneath lies, neglect, and betrayal. I grabbed my bag, walked to the door, and didn't look back. Outside, the air was cool against my face. I took a deep breath, the kind that reaches all the way down to your bones, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled because they thought they'd forced me out. But in truth, I had walked out on my own terms.
My apartment in Rochester wasn't much, but it was mine. A single bedroom with a squeaky radiator, secondhand furniture, and a view of the parking lot below. But when I turned the key in the lock that first night, the silence that greeted me was blissful. No shouting, no commands, no insults. I unpacked slowly, savoring the ritual. Clothes folded neatly into drawers, my father's watch placed carefully on the nightstand. Safe at last, a few potted plants lined up along the windowsill. It wasn't the garden I'd imagined, but it was a start. For days, I relished the peace. I woke when I wanted, drank coffee in quiet mornings, worked without the weight of endless chores pressing on me. My phone buzzed constantly. Calls, voicemails, texts, my mother-in-law screaming, my sister-in-law whining, Caleb pleading. At first, I ignored them all, but eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I played one of her voicemails, her voice shrill and desperate. "This house is a disaster, Abigail. The floors are sloping, the doors won't close, the walls are cracking. You knew, you set us up." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words wash over me like music. Every syllable was proof my plan had worked. But I wasn't satisfied with silence. Not anymore. They had taken so much from me. My peace, my time, my dignity. I wanted them to know I wasn't weak, that I had fought back in the only way I could. So when the calls grew relentless, I answered. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice calm. My mother-in-law exploded. "Don't play dumb. You tricked us into this nightmare. You'll pay for this." I let her rant, her fury spilling out unchecked, until her voice cracked and faltered. Then I said, softly, "You chose that house. You insisted, remember?" The silence on the line was sweeter than any revenge could have ever been. But I knew it wasn't over. Her threats grew sharper.
"We'll drag you to court, Abigail. We'll ruin your name. We'll make sure David at the agency knows what kind of woman you are." That was their favorite weapon. Control through fear. They had wielded it for years, dangling my job, my reputation, my marriage like chains around my neck. But what they didn't know was that I was ready. On my kitchen table lay my arsenal. Recordings of her verbal abuse, footage of my sister-in-law stealing from me, photos of Caleb with Haley, the doctor's letter diagnosing the toll their cruelty had taken. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I had built to protect myself. I wasn't afraid of their threats anymore. The day she demanded a face-to-face meeting, I agreed, but on my terms. A busy cafe in downtown Rochester. Public, neutral, safe. No walls to close in around me, no place for them to twist my words in private. As I hung up the phone, my hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. Instead, I felt calm. For years, I had been their pawn, their maid, their scapegoat. But when I walked into that cafe, I would no longer be their victim. I would be their reckoning. And as I gathered the evidence into a neat folder, I whispered to myself the truth I'd nearly forgotten. They hadn't broken me. They had forged me.
The cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and warm bread, the kind of place where people whispered over lattes and typed away on laptops. To anyone else, it was a haven of peace. For me, it was a battlefield. I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. Let them stew. Let them taste impatience for once. When I walked in, I spotted them immediately. My mother-in-law sat stiffly at a corner table, her cane leaning against her chair like a weapon. Her face was flushed, red with anger, her eyes sharp and unyielding. My sister-in-law slouched beside her, scrolling through her phone with that same careless smirk that had haunted me for months. And Caleb, pathetic Caleb, sat between them, his shoulders hunched, his nervous smile plastered on like a bandage over a wound. The moment they saw me, my mother-in-law snapped, "About time! How dare you keep us waiting?" I slid into the chair opposite them, calm, collected, my bag heavy with evidence. "I don't owe you respect," I said evenly. "Now, what do you want?" Her lips thinned into a hard line. "You tricked us into that house. The floors are sinking, the walls are cracking. You knew, admit it." My sister-in-law leaned forward, her voice sharp. "You set us up, Abigail. You'll pay for this. Fix it, or—" I held up a hand, silencing them. Then I leaned back, arms crossed, letting the tension stretch until the cafe noise seemed to fade away. "You chose that house," I said softly. "I told you I was only looking. You insisted. Caleb insisted. So no, I won't take responsibility for your greed." My mother-in-law's jaw tightened, her fingers drumming against the table. "Don't play innocent. We know you." I reached into my bag and laid a folded paper on the table. "A doctor's letter." "This," I said, sliding it toward her, "is a diagnosis. Adjustment disorder. Caused by stress and abuse. Yours." She snorted. "Pathetic. You're weak. A real daughter-in-law." I cut her off. "Verbal abuse, daily harassment, threats? That's not just cruel. It's slander. It's punishable. Up to a year in prison and a fine. I have your words recorded." Her face paled, but I wasn't done. I pulled out my phone, tapped play, and her own voice spilled into the cafe. "You're useless, Abigail. You'll never be good enough. You'll lose your job, and I'll make sure of it." Heads turned at nearby tables. My mother-in-law's eyes darted around, panic flickering beneath her fury. I turned to my sister-in-law next. "And you." From my bag, I produced a flash drive and placed it on the table. "Footage from my bedroom camera. You rifling through my drawers. You slipping my father's watch into your pocket. You stealing my jewelry. Theft. Punishable by up to 12 years or a hefty fine." Her smirk vanished. She shifted uncomfortably, her phone slipping from her hand. That's not proof." I tapped the flash drive. "It's enough for the police. Want me to show them?" She went pale. For once, she was speechless. Finally, I turned to Caleb. His hands fidgeted in his lap, his eyes pleading. "Abigail, let's be reasonable." I dropped an envelope in front of him. He froze. Inside were photos. Him and Haley, arms around each other, slipping into a motel, laughing like teenagers. "Reasonable?" I asked, my voice cold. "You lied to me. You betrayed me. And you let them treat me like garbage while you played house with a bartender." Caleb's face crumpled, his lips trembling. "It's not what it looks like. Save it." I leaned forward, my voice low, sharp as glass. "I have enough evidence to bury all of you. Abuse, theft, infidelity, extortion. I could take it to the police, to your jobs, to everyone you know, but I won't, on one condition." My mother-in-law swallowed hard, her mask of superiority slipping. "What condition?" "Leave me alone," I said. "No calls, no threats, no showing up at my job, my apartment, anywhere. If you come near me again, I release everything, and I promise you, the world will see you for what you really are." Silence. Heavy. suffocating silence. My sister-in-law stared at the table, her face pale. Caleb buried his head in his hands, and my mother-in-law, for the first time since I'd known her, she had nothing to say. I stood, gathering my things, my heart steady, my hands strong. I looked at each of them in turn and said the words I'd been waiting years to speak. "You don't own me anymore." And then I walked out. The air outside was crisp, the city buzzing around me. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with triumph. Behind me, in that little cafe, sat 3 people who had once ruled my life. Now they were nothing more than shadows. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was free.
The cafe confrontation was the last time I ever sat across from them. When I walked out that door, I left behind not just my marriage, not just the house, but the entire version of myself they had tried to break. The days that followed were quiet, almost unsettling in their peace. My little Rochester apartment became more than just a roof over my head. It became my sanctuary. I bought plants to line the window, bright green against the dull gray of the parking lot outside. I filled the space with small touches of me, the scarf I still had, the watch my sister-in-law had tried to steal, old photos of my mom. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Work at the agency felt different too. I was sharper, more focused. The weight I'd carried for years had lifted, and my pitches landed stronger than ever. David, my boss, noticed. "You seem more like yourself these days, Abigail," he said, smiling. I didn't tell him why. I didn't need to. Some victories are private, but word traveled quickly in small towns. Caleb couldn't hide from the fallout. Photos of him with Haley had trickled out, whispered about in bars and at the paper. Colleagues who once laughed at his jokes now avoided him. Mark, the manager who had introduced us, turned cold, disappointed. Caleb, the golden boy, had become a scandal. And then there was the house. Tara, my real estate agent, kept me updated. The floors were sinking faster now. The doors wouldn't shut. Cracks split the walls like spider webs. What had once been their trophy was now their burden. The mortgage weighed on Caleb like a noose, dragging him deeper into debt. My mother-in-law raged, blaming him, blaming his sister, blaming anyone but herself. My sister-in-law sulked, her nights out fewer and fewer as money dried up. But it didn't stop there. My evidence, the recordings, the footage, the theft, didn't go unused. My sister-in-law faced charges for what she stole. Nothing severe, but enough to stain her record and slap her with fines she couldn't afford. My mother-in-law wasn't spared either. Her threats, her extortion, her words, they caught up with her. Suddenly, the woman who lorded over everyone was standing in line for odd jobs, muttering about how the world had turned against her. Justice didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. A fine here, a whispered rumor there, a cracked wall, a lost job, a door that wouldn't close. Slowly, their lives unraveled, and they had no one to blame but themselves. One evening, months later, I left the office and saw Caleb waiting outside. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. His jacket was worn, his shoes scuffed, his once confident smile replaced by something small, desperate. "Abigail," he said softly, "you look good." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Caleb?" he sighed, staring at the ground. "I messed up. Mom and my sister, they're barely hanging on. The house is falling apart. I should have stood by you. I cut him off. Stop. You made your choice." His eyes lifted, pleading. "Can we try again? I'll cut them off, I swear. You're the one I want." I laughed, sharp, cold. "I'm seeing someone else, Caleb. And even if I wasn't, I'd never go back." His face crumpled. He sank to his knees on the sidewalk, his pride gone. But I felt nothing. Whatever love I had for him had been buried long ago. "Don't contact me again," I said, turning away. And he didn't. Tara told me later that the family's situation had only worsened. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law turned on each other, their screaming matches echoing through the neighborhood. Dishes shattered, doors slammed. Neighbors stopped visiting, too weary of the chaos. They were trapped in that sinking house, unable to sell without a loss, too broke to leave, too stubborn to admit defeat. I could almost picture them there, sitting in rooms that tilted just slightly, surrounded by walls splitting apart, blaming each other for everything. The same venom they once aimed at me, now devouring them from the inside. And me? I didn't gloat, not really. What I felt was quieter, steadier, a justice that hummed deep in my chest. They had reaped what they sowed. Nothing more, nothing less. Life moved forward.
A few months later, I met Ethan. He wasn't flashy or smooth-talking like Caleb had been. He was steady, kind, a salesman at a trading company with a quiet strength that made me feel safe. He listened when I spoke. He laughed at my terrible puns. He never once made me feel small.
We didn't rush things. I'd learned my lesson, but over time, I saw the difference. The kind of love that doesn't demand you shrink to fit into it. The kind of love that grows with you. Now, as I sit here telling this story, we're planning a small wedding by a lake in upstate New York. Nothing flashy, just us, a handful of friends, and the quiet promise of peace. Sometimes I think back to those dark days in the rental, the years of insults, the nights of tears. My chest still tightens at the memory. But then Ethan takes my hand, grounding me in the present, reminding me of how far I've come. Because here's the truth. Pain can hollow you out, but it can also carve space for something stronger. They tried to erase me, but instead, they created a version of me that refused to break. And if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been pushed to the edge, I want you to hear this. You are stronger than they think. I found my freedom in the ruins of what they tried to steal from me. And that freedom, it's the most beautiful revenge of all.
And that was Abigail's journey. From betrayal to freedom, from being treated like nothing to proving she was unstoppable. Her husband, her in-laws, they thought they broke her. Instead, they fueled the fire that made her stronger. Abigail didn't just walk away. She walked into a better life and left them trapped in the very house they stole from her. If her story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that no matter how dark it gets, there's always a way to rise again. Until next time, remember, every scar tells a story, and every ending can be a new beginning.